The past 15 months have been quite remarkable in terms of the collaboration between big business and Labour and, of course, government, or at least the National Treasury. But should this truce, this collaboration, this tripartite alliance between big capital, government and Labour be broken? Should big capital become more outspoken against the politics of the day as the cacophony of political noise continues to build up to an even larger crescendo? Political parties are coming together with their aggregated support to try and force President Jacob Zuma to step down from his post. This is the Moneymakers. I'm Bruce Whitfield, and tonight we're talking about the various strategies that are at play and what big business should be doing with the increasingly outspoken chief executive of Sygnia Asset Management, Magda Wierzycka, who joins us on the line from Cape Town. I mean, you're getting increasingly angry, increasingly concerned, Magda, about the state of play following not only the recall of President Gordon from London in the midst of an investor roadshow, but his sacking and the sacking of Khaleesi Jonas, and now the departure of the Director General of the Treasury as well.
Indeed, Bruce. I think, well, what I'm getting possibly disappointed about is that there is so little voice coming from the business community and from people who literally control the capital and who invest in government bonds, who invest in, state-owned enterprises. And I believe that we have a very powerful voice that we should be bringing to the table. We're sitting in a situation which was completely and artificially created by one man's whim in dismissing Pravin Gordhan. So let's be very clear. 3 weeks ago, we didn't have credit rating downgrades on the table. Now we are drunk. That has increased the cost of doing business with South Africa. It has increased the cost of doing business for South African corporates, never mind for government, never mind the impact that will have on absolutely every strata of society and in particular the poor. And I believe that we should be a lot more vocal as a business community in criticizing what is going on.
Big business was criticised for years for not speaking out during the days of Thabo Mbeki. There was a huge amount of intimidation of big business and threats of audits by SARS, and the might of the state would be brought down on large companies and their chief executives if they dared criticise issues on crime, for example. Then the Zuma administration came in and the same criticism has persisted through there. Then, after Nhlanhla Nene got fired, there was this huge collaboration instigated by President Gordhan and a group of business leaders, and that seemed to be going rather well, but it was a pretty two-dimensional relationship. It was with the National Treasury. It wasn't with the state as a whole. Does big business have anything to lose by going rogue on the CEO working group, as it's known?
Well, I think, look, obviously big business has a lot to lose because, there are a lot of government tenders that make the rounds. But having said that, it is a symbiotic relationship because big business, asset management industry, life insurance companies in particular, are also the providers of capital to government. So it's not a singular, kind of relationship or one-way relationship. And consequently, I believe that, if we stood up as a collective, we could have a very meaningful impact. Whereas what I'm seeing is corporate South Africa almost retreating from this debate in its entirety. And that's very sad to watch. One of the major achievements since 1994 that South Africa has made has been in building up a very, very credible national treasury, which was world-renowned, world-respected. And what we're seeing in the last 2.5 weeks is mass resignations from national treasury, and I believe that more of that will continue. So we will lose that strength of national treasury that has taken many years to build up. Those people will be gone. Those skills will be gone. It will take us, a decade to recover from what has happened in the last 2.5 weeks.
I mean, if big business won't speak up, the bond market will, and we've seen it many times in history, not only in South Africa, but across the globe. It was an advisor to Bill Clinton who said when he died he wanted to come back as the bond market because the bond market can do anything. That is where the power lies, but unfortunately that's a slower burn solution, and it's, the damage will be far more serious if CEOs don't step into the breach here.
100%. And I think, we've been slightly cushioned by the fact that in the last quarter there has been an unusually large movement of capital into emerging markets, which is actually what has propped up our markets and what has propped up the rand. Because otherwise, if it wasn't for the fact that developed markets are getting disillusioned.
I'm sure that's a very important call. I mean, people phoning you at 9 o'clock at night, Magda. I mean, you're very popular and very important. But thank you for putting that on hold. Sorry, the bond market flows, they've been quite extraordinary.
So the bond market flows have been, astronomical. It's one of the strongest quarters ever on record. And the reason for that has been this kind of, developed markets disappointment with the Trump trade and the search for yield argument. And that has literally cushioned the effect of the dismissal of Pravin Gordhan in terms of the rand, because frankly, the rand should be at 15 to 16, and we might very well get there by the end of the year. And that has dire implications for the South African economy, which I believe will flatline from this point onwards, if not go into an outright recession. This has dire implications for literally every South African. I mean, if inflation skyrockets because the rand depreciates, and everything that we import, including fuel, increases in price, then every South African is poorer for it. We're paying higher interest rates. A couple of weeks ago, there was a debate of the Reserve Bank cutting interest rates. Well, I think that debate is off the table. There's no job creation. Without job creation, we will have greater crime, greater degree of social problems. There are no conversations on the table right now about, improving the state of our social welfare or education, all those debates that a normalized society and a normalized government should be having. Meanwhile, the only conversation on the table right now is graft and corruption. In a democracy, I believe that people need to speak up and have the freedom to speak up. Business is a very, very important segment of this economy.
You would have seen the remarks in the Sunday Times over the weekend where some of the president's closest allies, advisors, confidants, as far as we know, were massively outspoken on the ratings downgrade, playing it down as if it was nothing. We had the likes of Nomvula Mokonyane, we had the likes of Dudu Myeni, Edward Zuma, the president's son, people to whom we think the president listens, so saying, we can do it, this is no big issue, we'll get investors back on our own terms when we're good and ready. Now, you've lived through totalitarian regimes. Your family became refugees in the early 1980s as you escaped Poland, as capital dried up, as communism was slowly coming to its knees. I mean, do you sort of feel as if we're on the brink of something as disastrous as that from a South African perspective?
I think it's a slow decline, but undoubtedly, yes. So, communist countries were literally starved of capital. So by the time we left Poland, the situation was very dire. I mean, there was no food. So those countries started running into food shortages. We were given food stamps, which entitled us to buy a loaf of bread once a week. But of course, that didn't mean that there was a loaf of bread in the shop. So shops were completely empty. I think for South Africa, and obviously South Africa is a large economy, the decline will be more gradual. I think the poor will feel it the first. And, I think we will see another potential drain of skills and talent from this country. And this is the talent we badly need in order to create jobs. And I think, the commentary that I have seen, I view as nothing more than propaganda that I was well exposed to by, the communist regimes that controlled Eastern Europe and by Russia. And they're very naive commentaries. I wish, I could give them a 101 lecture on economics and capital markets and who controls capital, because none of, really many of those comments were laughable.
We're sitting in a bit of a fool's paradise right now. Those bond flows that we continue to see, about 3 billion rands worth a day, coming in and supporting a slow burn in the currency rather than a sharp sell-off as we saw after Nhlanhla Nene was fired. That will remain in place for as long as our local currency rating remains investment grade. Fitch has downgraded both local and foreign currency down to sub-investment grade. It's only going to take one more downgrade, and the rand then goes on that slippery slope to levels that you mentioned earlier.
It does indeed, because one more downgrade of our local currency denominated debt will mean that South Africa will fall out of the World Government Bond Index calculated by Citibank. So all those funds that are currently passively tracking that index will literally have a fire sale on South African bonds, and that will amount to roughly 10 billion US dollars flowing out of the bond market. So that's about 137 billion rand. That will flow out of the country. That's a humongous amount of money. That's almost equivalent to what South Africa needed to borrow this year just to balance our books. So those are the type of numbers we should be looking at. Now, much will depend on whether the newly installed finance minister, who frankly is a novice, can persuade foreign investors that, in fact, he's got national treasury and fiscal policy under control, and that our politics are stable. But I mean, it's laughable. The fiscal policy is not going to be under control, particularly if we are now entering into nuclear deals as we are. The politics are very volatile, and you need to look at the optics. So international investors, in looking at South Africa, give us 5 minutes attention, in a very busy day. And what do they see? They see mass protests in the streets. They see, political parties fighting. They see votes of no confidence in the president. And that's literally their attention span. You take a look at something like that, and, if I was an international investor, I would run for the hills.
But those international investors may be swayed if South Africa could be seen to be standing up for itself, taking its own action, and perhaps, as I think you have suggested, say to the president, here's your get out of jail free card, please take it, and here is a lump sum to finish the fence at Nkandla, and please spend some time there.
Absolutely. I would offer him as much money as he wishes to have. I would offer him every immunity under the sun, because I think that the damage that can be done to this country and to this economy in a very short period of time is so much greater than any amount of money that he could possibly want to live out his years. I think the conversations we should be having in South Africa are about poverty, inequality, social welfare, about job creation, economic growth, education, healthcare. There are so many policy conversations that we should be having. Meanwhile, we are talking about, as I said, corruption, SASA contracts, people's love lives, emails, SMSs, BE deals. It's ridiculous.
Sygnia Chief Executive Magda Wierzycka not pulling any punches at all this evening on the Moneymakers. Magda Wierzycka on the line to us from Cape Town. Thank you very much for joining us, and thank you for watching this evening's edition of the Moneymakers. You're a Chief Executive, you're the chairman of a company. Have you got what it takes to stand up and be counted at a time of crisis for South Africa? If you do, get in touch. We'd love to chat. Till next time, bye-bye.